I did not know the kind of style and energy with which she would deliver that to words were as beautiful and funny and thoughtful and also deep. And you are right? The takeaway you're bringing for us is let's not make hasty decisions. Let's not do things quickly that we might regret later. And that is one of the key messages of this story. We also see in this moment that when we do make mistakes like that, whether they're hasty or in any way, we have the ability to change. The story of Judah in this parsha is the story of change. Here was a man who did sell his brother into slavery, and then came, just 2 portions later, he comes right before his brother. He doesn't at first know he's his brother, but he makes a different choice about a different brother, another favorite brother, willing to risk his own life and his own freedom to completely reverse the behavior that he'd shown in the past, to do the opposite, to not only not sell his brother into slavery, but to put himself out there in his brother's place. And this kind of change in Judaism we call teshuvah. Teshuvah is a central idea in Judaism. We often translate it as repentance. It means turning or returning, and it means changing. And Maimonides taught that for teshuvah to be complete, to know that we really have repented, we've really changed, we will find ourselves in the same situation again, and we will act differently. And that is the evidence that we have truly changed. So we see that in this portion because Judah gets another opportunity that's very much like the first one and gets to do something different. So the teshuvah is complete in that way. And as you point out, Joseph is in the position of being able to offer forgiveness. Right? And his sobs and his response to his brothers is kind of a paradigmatic moment of forgiveness, where they sold him into slavery and he's ready to embrace them again. I want to look a little more carefully at the text to see what's going on here and see what we can learn from it, because I think there's another layer of learning that's possible from this episode. So when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, says, I am Joseph, the Torah says, Nivhalu mipanecha. They were, maybe we want to interpret it as afraid. That's often how it's translated. They couldn't speak because Nivhalu mipanecha. They were afraid of him, or maybe a better translation would be like stunned before him, or shocked before him. What Rashi says is that they were feeling is shame. That in that moment when they were face to face with their brother again after having sold him into slavery, their emotion was shame, and it was shame that prevented them from being able to speak in that moment. And the next thing that happens is Joseph says to them, Yeshuna, which means draw close to me. Same root as the first, as we talked about before, the name of the parsha, Vayigash, draw near, draw close to me. And the rabbis are wondering, well, why? Why does he pull them close to them? Why does he pull them close to him at that moment? And the interpretation that Rashi gives is that he wants to soothe them from their shame. He recognizes that they're ashamed, and he wants to say, come near. He wants to help them not feel ashamed for what they did. And he says, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into slavery. So he names what they did, but he also draws them near. And it's an attempt to not gloss over what they did, but also comfort them. What's interesting in this verse is that other interpreters, particularly medieval and later commentators, have a different reading of why he drew them close. And Dad's Genim, which is a later collection of commentary, suggests that the reason he drew them close was that Dad's Genim gives 2 reasons. One is he drew them close because he didn't want the Egyptians to hear it. He was fine with the Egyptians hearing him cry and hearing him say that he's their brother, but he didn't want them to hear him say, you sold me into slavery. Because he was worried that if the Egyptians were got out of Egypt and these brothers sold him, that the Egyptians wouldn't want them to come live there, because what kind of people sell their brother into slavery? They wouldn't want his family to live in Egypt. The second interpretation that Dad's Genim gives is he drew them close because he didn't want his brother Benjamin to know what they had done. His younger brother, his little brother Benjamin, who was Rachel's other son, who was also Jacob's favorite, he didn't want him to know what the other brothers did to Joseph. He was worried what Benjamin would think, and he was worried that Benjamin would go and tell Jacob what the brothers had done. And I want to note this because even though it looks like Judah did full teshuvah, because he was in the same situation again and completely changed his behavior, there was an important piece missing from the brothers' teshuvah, which is that we see Joseph say what they did, but they never say what they did. So we see Judah have remorse. As you mentioned, he felt guilty. We see him act differently, but we never see a moment where he and the other brothers come forward and say, we did this bad thing, and we are sorry. And without that key middle piece, the teshuvah in important ways was not complete. What we know later in next week's portion is that next week we're going to see the end of Jacob's life. And we see that in many ways Jacob's relationship with his sons, other than Joseph, is still not great. You can see in what he says to them at the end of his life, that he still has a lot of reservations about his sons. And we also see after his death that the brothers are still holding a lot of anxiety about what they did, because they are worried that Joseph is going to turn on them and be angry at them for what they did. And Joseph said he forgave them, but maybe he didn't really. And we might interpret that part of why they're not resolved is because they missed the middle steps. They never actually came forward and said, we did this bad thing and we are sorry. They did the first part, at least Judah did. He felt guilt and regret. And the last part, which was changing the behavior, but never the acknowledgement. And that we, today, in our rules for teshuvah, we include all those steps. We have to actually say, I did this thing, and I am sorry. And then we change our behavior. And this brought to mind a recent report that came out about the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the rabbinical school of the Reform movement, rabbinical and tutorial school and education school and Jewish communal service school of the Reform movement. And this school just did a comprehensive report. So this is the school where I went, this is the school where Teacher Wrights went, all of our clergy here went there, and our interns go there now. You may have read about this in the news, you may not, but I want to say a word about it, which is that there was a report that came out that was based on a very, very thoughtful and thorough study of the last 50 years of the college, looking at sexism and homophobia and racism in the college, and looking at sexual harassment and inappropriate sexual behavior for the last 50 years. And I think whenever an institution engages in a process like this, there is the fear that what will come out will be shameful. And it will shame the institution, it will shame the graduates of the institution, it will shame the rabbinate or the cantorate or the movement. There's a lot of reasons to kind of keep it quiet, especially when you're looking at 50 years worth of content. Some of those people aren't alive anymore. Like, why stir it up? Why put it into the public? Why say out loud, this is what we did and we are sorry? But what we learn from this parsha is if you skip those steps, you can never, even if you change, you never are really complete in your teshuvah. You have to actually be willing to own what happened. And in this report, the researchers did 170 interviews, and they found a really large number of pretty shameful incidents in the history of the college, and a real pattern of sexism and intolerance for sexual harassment, and some examples of really very egregious and horrible acts that were highly inappropriate in terms of sexual behavior in the history of the college. And what I think we get from this parsha, and what we know from the way that we behave as Jews, is that this was the right thing for the college to do, despite the fact that nobody really wants to see the college be shamed in that way. Because only after that kind of act, and that kind of study, and that kind of publicity, and that kind of owning of the past, can the change that comes be fully complete? Can the problem be fully resolved when it's owned, and when the apology is made, and when then the change can be real? And so, Fiona, you taught us today. You taught us not to take hasty action, to be careful in our decisions, so that we don't regret them later? Yes. The Parsha also taught us that when we realize we did make a mistake, we always have the ability to feel the remorse, to name what we did, to apologize for what we did, and as Judy did in this Parsha, to change. And then there's the possibility, as Joseph exemplified, to be big-hearted and to forgive, and to allow all the people involved to move forward in a way that best represents our values. May that be a pattern and a path for all of us in all of our doings in life. May all of our institutions take responsibility for their pasts and their wrongdoings. May we move toward a future in which we treat each other with the kind of kindness and respect and dignity that everyone deserves. And then may we have a world in which this is represented through our individual acts and all institutions of society as a whole. In Yirat Son.